Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thanks very much for giving up your valuable time and joining us today. We really appreciate it. This is the latest in our series of webinars that we're doing on various flight safety matters. And the purpose of these webinars, if you've been to one before, if you've been to our in-person seminars before, is really just to pause what we're doing, reflect on how we're conducting our flying, and look for any opportunities there might be for us to improve our safety practices. I think that's an important step in our safety ethos, to do that every now and then. Little things can creep in. Our knowledge is perishable, so it's really good for us to do this every now and then, and we really thank you for joining us today to hopefully do that. So these webinars, not as interactive as our in-person seminars, but they do give us a lot wider reach. So you can join us from a lot more places, and hopefully you're somewhere comfortable, and hope you can make yourself comfortable, grab a tea or coffee, and hopefully get something out of today's presentation. Today's presentation is about Special VFR. Just some administration points before we start, just to help things run smoother. You may have noticed we've muted your mics and cameras. That's just to help keep things running smoother, the video and all that sort of stuff. There's a comments section or a chat section for those of you who know how to use it. It's up the top of your screen there, somewhere about there. There'll be a little speech bubble, and if you've got that open already, you've noticed I've already put some links in there that might be of use to you. So throughout the presentation, if you have a question or a comment, or perhaps a personal experience relevant to the subject matter that you want to share, feel free to pop that in the chat, and we'll get to your questions at the end of the presentation. And any that we can't get to because of time constraints or anything, we'll take on notice, and we'll get back to you in due course for that. So the links I've put up at the moment, if you have got the chat section open, I've put up a link to the visual flight guide, which has some information about Special VFR in it. I've put up a link to the accident study or report that we're using as a case study today, in case you want further information. And I've also put up my email address if you have any residual questions or any matters you wanted to discuss after we finish the presentation. We partner with Credly to issue these digital badges, and these digital badges are a bit of a record and acknowledgement that you have engaged with us on these safety formats. Sort of indicates your commitment to continuous improvement, which is fantastic. So these digital badges you can use in your email signature blocks. You can include them on digital resumes, for example, and you can also share them on social media. And if you look at the one up on the screen there now, you notice that this one specifically lists the subject matter that we're talking about today. So if they are of any use to you and you'd like a digital badge sent to you on completion of the presentation today, all you need to do is just stay for the duration of the presentation, and then afterward you'll receive an email and it'll show you how to download that. So why are we talking about Special VFR today? How do we pick these topics that we talk about in our webinars? So predominantly we go to things like accident data from the NTSB. If we look at the accident data, we can see that sometimes Special VFR is leading people into adverse situations. And we want to understand why that's the case so that hopefully we can prevent it. So one of the reasons we're talking about it today is it does feature in the accident data from time to time. And as an aviation advisor, I basically go around the countryside a lot, as do my comrades in the team, and we talk to a lot of pilots. We find that Special VFR is not always 100% understood, how to use it, what the limitations are and the rules around it. So we want to try and clear up that today as well with people who may want to use it and are not sure how, or are using it and perhaps not using it as effectively and safely as they could. The other thing we notice when we talk to people about Special VFR is sometimes they know the rules surrounding it, but there's not quite the right amount of risk assessment before they use it, and risk mitigation if they use it. It's a really useful tool that we can use, but it does, like any tool, need to be used for the correct job and with the appropriate amount of risk mitigation in place. So we want to help people understand what the correct process is there. So what are we going to talk about today as part of our webinar? Well, first we'll define what Special VFR is, so we're crystal clear on that. We'll talk about the regulations that surround it. Then I'm going to talk about a case study where an example of where it went wrong. And then we're lucky today to be joined by our guest speaker, Mark Richardson, who is a very experienced pilot and a CASA flight ops inspector. I'll do a more formal introduction of Mark when I hand over to him a bit later in the presentation. We'll finish off with a summary, and then at the end, we'll address as many of your questions as we can from the chat there. And as I said, any that we don't or can't address due to time, or perhaps we need to go away and get some information, we can follow up with an email for you. So let's start. What is Special VFR? Well, Special VFR is a clearance that allows pilots to operate under visual flight rules, but in conditions that are below standard VFR minima. But it's important to understand it's not a free-for-all. It's not any conditions of weather. They can be below VFR minima, but they still must be above the IFR thresholds to operate Special VFR. The other thing to remember about Special VFR is you can only use it within the lateral boundaries of a control zone or a controlled area adjacent to a control zone. That's it. Special VFR is not applicable anywhere else. And to use Special VFR within that control zone or the controlled area adjacent to it, we need a specific clearance from air traffic control. So it's a tool that we can use, a clearance that we can get to enter or exit a control zone when the conditions don't quite meet the VFR minima. So what are some of those rules surrounding it? Well, if we look up there, we can see that if you get a Special VFR clearance, as the pilot, you're responsible for ensuring that you can conduct the flight clear of cloud. With respect to visibility, if you're flying an aeroplane, you will need at least 1,600 meters of visibility. Helicopters, obviously, can fly a bit slower, a bit safer, so they only require 800 meters of visibility. But that's on the proviso that they operate at such a speed that allows adequate opportunity to observe any obstructions or other traffic, and with sufficient time to avoid collisions with those. So let's, in the case of the airplane, put a little bit of perspective around that. 1,600 meters of visibility. That's about 0.8 of a mile. So if you're flying an aircraft that is traveling at, say, 90 knots, you're doing about 1.5 miles a minute. Really, at 1,600 meters, you only have about 30 seconds of forward visibility. So it's not a lot. So this is not a procedure that we should use just ad hoc. It really does require due consideration for the extra level of risk that it could create if it's not used correctly. A couple of other things about Special VFR. First of all, you must request it. Air traffic control cannot offer you a Special VFR clearance. As the pilot, you must request it. And once you have requested it, air traffic control can only issue that clearance if it's not going to unduly delay IFR flights that might be operating into and out of the zone that you're in. That's a really important one to remember when we talk about risk mitigation. If I'm on the ground waiting to get a Special VFR clearance to depart, that's not such a big deal. I'm on the ground, I'm safe, I just have to wait. But if I'm waiting for the clearance to come back into the control zone and I have to hold, well, then I have to think about what's the weather like where I'm holding? Can I maintain proper VFR criteria in that area while I hold? Because in some cases, you won't know how long that holding is going to take place. So these are the sort of things we need to think about before taking Special VFR as an option. Let's have a look at a case study where it's gone wrong. Case studies are not always pleasant to talk about, of course. It can be a little bit distressing. I've purposely picked a case study that occurred overseas today. I'm hoping that'll minimize the chances of causing anyone any distress or too much distress. I think it's important we look at these incidents though even though they may end tragically. And I certainly don't look at these incidents with a view to pointing the finger of blame at the pilot, or perhaps sitting here in a nice comfortable room thinking, gee, I would have never done that. This pilot was in a different situation. They made decisions for a reason. We need to understand why. And the most important thing is we need to apply those reasons of what shouldn't have happened to our flying, learn from the mistakes so that we don't repeat them. That's the important part of the case studies. So the case study today occurred in January of 2020, and it occurred near California in the United States. You probably heard of this one in the news. It was a Sikorsky S-76 pilot plus 8 passengers. One of those passengers was a very high-profile individual, very famous basketball player in the United States, who had his young daughter, sadly had his young daughter on board the aircraft, as well as 6 other passengers. Let's have a look at the pilot who was involved in this particular incident and the flight, and see how it relates to our special VFR discussion. There's some really sobering points here for all of us, particularly those of us with an instrument rating. The pilot in this case held a commercial helicopter pilot's license. He held an instrument rating. That's an important fact to remember. And he also held an instructor rating. With respect to hours, this pilot had over 8,000 hours, 1,250 of which were on this specific aircraft type. So this is not an inexperienced pilot. This is a pilot with quite a number of qualifications, yet still fell into a trap of poor decision making. With respect to recency, this pilot had done a flight review some 8 months ago, and that flight review was well documented, and it was shown that he actually did inadvertent entry into IMC training and unusual attitude recovery on instruments training. Now, these are all things that you would think would prevent an accident like the one that we were about to talk about. But as this shows, it's not always enough. The flight itself was quite a straightforward flight. It was a passenger transfer from a place called John Wayne Orange County Airport to an airport called Camarillo, but all in California, as I mentioned, near LA. I've got some maps to show you. This pilot had taken this particular client on exactly the same flight the day before. So this was not an unusual flight. It was not a new route or anything of that nature. So if we have a look at the map here, we'll see that the flight originated down in this bottom right-hand corner and was initially conducted outside of controlled airspace, moving up to the northwest, then required a clearance through these control zones before exiting the control zone again into outside controlled airspace. The accident occurred in this location here. On the particular day, I've got some photos of the weather to show you in a second, but basically what was happening is there was quite a significant sea fog coming in from the southwest here, pushing in across the land. And you may be able to see on this map here, there's some ridge lines along here and along this area here. So what was happening is that sea fog was pushing up against those ridge lines, banking up and causing quite a thick, distinct layer of cloud with quite a distinct top at 2,400 feet AMSL. In all of this little sort of area here on the lower area, relative humidity on the day was up around the 100%. What that meant is the cloud bases were really indistinct and really variable. What we know about the flight from the accident report is this first part of the flight that was done outside of controlled airspace was done at about 700 to 800 feet AMSL, about 600 to 700 feet above ground level. That's a fairly low height to be flying over populous areas like that. And obviously because of that cloud base being variable, visibility being a little bit reduced, the pilot was sort of forced down to that lower level. It was at this point when the pilot got towards the edge of the control zones there that he was going to need a clearance, and certainly wasn't going to get a VFR clearance through the control zones due to the weather. So he requested a special VFR clearance. Air traffic control looked at it, but it was going to unduly delay IFR traffic in these control zones. So the pilot was asked to hold in this area here. And remember back to what I said before, we really need to think about the what ifs. If I'm asked to hold in an area, is it going to be safe? Is the weather going to be such that I can do that holding safely with adequate visibility to avoid obstacles and traffic? The controllers questioned the pilot about his in-flight conditions, and he indicated that he was in VMC. Once the IFR traffic was cleared, the controllers cleared the incident aircraft through the control zones under a special VFR clearance. So the weather was bad enough to need that special VFR clearance within the zone, and it became pretty evident that it was also bad enough outside of the zones that would preclude normal VFR flight. After exiting the control zone, things started to go pretty badly wrong here. I've got a sort of blown up picture of this part of the route here, which I'll show you now. So we see the aircraft coming out through this sort of valley here, up the valley following the highway. You may be able to make out little green dots on this picture. That's the NTSB hits that were coming off the aircraft itself. This is how they're able to get that track. The pilot reported that he was going to have to climb above cloud to get clear, and air traffic control acknowledged that. But then air traffic control noted this flight path that was a sort of left turn, descending turn with increasing rate of descent and increasing airspeed. When air traffic control asked the pilot what the intentions were, he said, "I'm climbing to clear cloud." Given that the aircraft was in a descent at the time that the pilot reported that he was climbing, we sort of have to assume, or the accident report assumes, that at that point the pilot was spatially disorientated. Rate of descent, it was shown, exceeded 4,000 feet per minute. Ground speed was about 160 knots just prior to the impact point, which was here. So spatial disorientation really looks like a major factor in this particular accident. And it sort of goes back to what I was saying before about this pilot holding an instrument rating. You would think if you held an instrument rating that would be a good level of protection against some sort of IMC into VMC into IMC type accident. But if you do hold an instrument rating, or if you can remember back to your last flight review when your instructor showed you how to fly in instruments to perhaps get out of a VFR into IMC situation, you'll probably remember it's a real mindset. We've actually got to be flying visually, or we've got to be flying on instruments. It's entirely possible that because this pilot was in and out of poor vis, he may have been getting glimpses of terrain and was actually still looking out of the window, trying to get an idea of where the horizon was and not concentrating on the instruments. Had he made that sort of decision and flicked that switch to say, no, I am on instruments, I'm in IFR, we need to look at the attitude indicator, make ourselves safe, plan and fly some sort of escape maneuver to get us up to safety height, and do that with a selective radial scan on instruments. That's what's going to keep us safe. So at one point in this climb here, the aircraft reached 2,370 feet. The cloud tops were 2,400 feet. So this pilot almost made it out, but unfortunately in conditions like this, almost is not good enough, and it didn't help them in this particular case. Let's have a look at some photos that show the weather at the time of the accident. A witness saw the aircraft impact the hill from further down the valley and took a photo, and I've circled the accident site in red. So from this photo, we can see, remember I talked about the relative humidity being about 100%. You can see the mist, you can see the poor visibility, and you can see that fog layer or that mist layer up above where the accident site was. The accident site was about 1,100 feet AMSL. This was a photograph taken from one of the ridge lines and shows the top of the cloud base. So the top of that cloud base there, looking back out over the ocean, is 2,400 feet. So you can see it's quite a thick layer, and that this pilot was attempting VFR flight below that layer in conditions that we can see are really not conducive to VFR flight. This particular image is a still taken from a CCTV video feed from a security camera in a business on the way up the hill. Both this camera, you can see the helicopter just there in this camera. There was also a witness that was looking at the helicopter as well. Both the video and the witness indicate the helicopter flew into a cloud bank. That was pretty much at the time from where we saw them start that left turn, climbing left turn, which eventually turned into the descending left turn. So it looks like the pilot again was trying to find a visual horizon and suffered some form of spatial disorientation. A bike rider on the hill at the impact site, as I mentioned, about 1100 feet AMSL, saw the impact and tried to see if there's any survivors. There weren't, came back and took a photo. And if you look at the right-hand side of this photo, going down the hill there, you can sort of see that misty area as well in the cloud. I doubt there would have been very much warning, if any at all, for the pilot to have seen that terrain before impact. Couple of photos here. The top one shows the peaks where the accident occurred on the day of the accident, and the bottom one shows on a clear day. So we can clearly see that cloud bank, even though you can see the ground reasonably well underneath the cloud bank, you just don't know where the tops are. And unfortunately, if we do enter that cloud bank below safety height, all bets are off. We're really just relying on luck at that point. So it's really important we don't get to that point where we are in a position where we have no options. It's really important that we have options in this case. So what did the NTSB, in Australia we have the ATSB, America, NTSB. This is their findings, that the pilot's continuation of the flight into IMC was inconsistent with his typical judgment. This is a really important point to note as well. If you read the accident report, you'll see that this pilot had a really good safety reputation. He had cancelled flights before based on weather. And it shows us that even though we like to make good decisions and we consider ourselves safe people, we're not immune to poor decisions on any particular day. So it's important we stay vigilant and make sure that we follow really well documented processes to make these decisions before we go flying and once we're airborne. So they believe from the second point there that the pilot may have experienced some sort of planned continuation bias. And I understand that. This is a very high profile individual who you really want to look after. This individual was known to actually request this pilot personally, which I think would be a great compliment to that pilot. And I guess he didn't want to let him down. So often these accidents occur because people have good intentions, but they are somewhat misguided. And even if it's not a commercial operation, all of us who fly will have some level of pressure on us to fly. It could be self-induced. It could be pride. It could be we don't want to let our friends down. We've promised them a flight. They're going back home tomorrow. If we don't do it today, we're not going to get it done at all. These are all pressures we face, but we have to consider amongst the whole risk assessment before we fly, regardless of the nature of the flight. Couple of points I've highlighted here from their findings that I think we could all take away ourselves and make sure that we don't fall into this trap. So the decision making by the pilot, they believe, was affected by self-induced pressure to fulfill the client's travel needs. And again, I don't think it has to be a commercial operation to have that self-induced pressure on us. So watch out for it. If you find yourself falling into that trap, stop and think. Another big one is there didn't appear to be an alternative plan here. The pilot didn't seem to have an out. And it's really important we do that, particularly if we're flying in areas of poor visibility or potentially poor visibility. It's always worth having a plan B. If we've thought about it before the flight, it's much easier to enact it when things start going wrong in the flight itself. Planned continuation bias is another one I've highlighted. Get there-itis. We all suffer from that. And the data, the accident data we see shows us, and it's a good thing for us pilots to remember, that these types of accidents typically occur in the last half of the flight. And that sort of makes sense. The closer we get to our destination, the more inclined we are to say, oh no, look, if I just push a bit more, I'll be able to get through, it'll be okay, and I'll get to the destination. It's much easier to push on than go all the way back to where I came from. Well, we need to recognize that as a danger period and say, no, The risk is exactly the same here. We need to make good decisions now, regardless if I'm close to my destination or close to my point of departure. So a few good points there I think we really need to remember as pilots. So to talk a bit more about Special VFR and its use and the proper strategies to use it, we're joined by Mark Richardson. Mark's been with CASA for 17 years. He has been in aviation for 42 years, got over 10,000 hours. He's an instructor, he's also an examiner, and he's held positions in various organisations, including being a check and training officer for a regional airline. So Mark, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Craig. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. As Craig said, I'm Mark Richardson. I'm a Senior CASA Inspector of Flying Operations. I'm based over here in Perth, where the weather's normally lovely, but it's a little bit stormy outside today. I'm just going to have a quick talk about my experiences with Special VFR and a quick couple of reminders about the things we should be remembering when we're operating normal VFR and Special VFR. So next slide, please, Craig. Just a quick reminder that while we are flying in Class G airspace below 3,000 feet, our expected VFR requirements are to be clear of cloud and to have a 5,000 metres of in-flight visibility. When we cross over the line, however, into controlled airspace, that changes, and this is where Special VFR becomes an important tool for the pilot when we transfer from Class G coming into a controlled airspace of some description. Most of you will be familiar with operating into the Class D metro towers, Jandakot, Parafield, Archerfield, Moorabbin, etc. When we cross over that line, we're now expected to be at least 500 feet below cloud and 600 metres horizontally separated from cloud, but still with an in-flight visibility of 5,000 metres. That would mean that if I was entering a Class D metro and the cloud base was, say, 2,000 feet and the entry was via a 1,500-foot entry via the ERSA requirement, I am just meeting the VFR requirements for entry into that airspace. As soon as that cloud goes below 2,000 feet, I'm no longer meeting it, and I, in that circumstance, should be looking at requesting a Special VFR clearance. So keep that in mind. So what is Special VFR? What's special about Special VFR? As Craig pointed out, it's a procedure. It exists within documentation. It is both shown within the VFRG at page 208, or it's expressed within the Part 91 Manual of Standards in section 2.01. For those of you who wish to go and look those up, please feel free to go and look those up, or we can provide them to you in the chat afterwards. It's only available at controlled aerodromes or in controlled airspace, as Craig has pointed out. And one of the important things about that is it gives you ATC support. So it gives you another asset that you can call on to maintain your situational awareness. And I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. Separation is provided while you're inside that airspace. Normally at a Metro D, it is traffic advised and it's the pilot responsibility for separating with that traffic. When you request Special VFR, that changes and the air traffic controller becomes a partner with you in providing that separation from other aircraft. And as Craig mentioned, 1,600 metres of visibility is the minimum and clear of cloud. And that is assisted by having that air traffic controller there to keep awareness of other traffic around you. But as Craig also mentioned, that's about 30 seconds of in-flight visibility, so it's reduced dramatically. Rotorcraft, of course, 800 metres, but as Craig pointed out, you can slow down in a rotorcraft, so you get more time. One of the things that I note in talking to pilots about Special VFR and the things that I've noted over the years using Special VFR myself, it seems to be a stigma attached to it. People don't like admitting that they need it. There's no reason for that. Special VFR is a procedure. It's in the documents. There are processes. It's an agreement with air traffic control. It is a tool that's in your toolbox that you can use to maintain safety of flight. I want to be really sure on this. There's nothing shameful. There's nothing admitting you're wrong. There's no stigma attached to using Special VFR. In fact, the more people I see using it, the more I'm confident that they are operating professionally and safely. One thing that it does do is Special VFR does give you that higher level of safety. It might be reduced visibility and lower cloud, but you've got more people working with you, more separation provided by the air traffic controllers. Craig mentioned you have to ask. Air traffic control can't give it to you. And let's just work the reason why. The reason why is an air traffic controller can't determine what your skill sets, what your limitations are. And if it's a real Special VFR day with those minimum visibilities, an air traffic controller can't offer you that without you acknowledging that it's within your capabilities, within your limitations to be able to do that. Hence the reason why you must request it in the conditions. So always keep that in mind. You're requesting it, and at that time you're requesting it, you're telling that air traffic controller that you're capable of being there. Let's just be pretty clear on that. Using those capabilities must be within your currency, within your ability, within your license category, okay? Let's not go pushing outside our own personal capabilities. So what should I think about when I'm using Special VFR? Well, the first question is, should I be there in the first place? Let's just ask ourselves that. If it's Special VFR, do I really need to go flying today? If we're operating the aeroplane for our own personal needs under Part 91, well, maybe we don't need to be there. So let's keep that in mind. Slow your airplane down. As Craig mentioned, 27 to 30 seconds of in-flight visibility for your standard 172 Piper Warrior doing 110 knots. That's not a lot. That's not a lot at all. So slow yourself down, get yourself configured, and operate the aeroplane appropriate to the in-flight visibility that you have to give yourself more time. What if we're going outbound from a Class D or a Metro Class D or any other Class D around Australia? We can use Special VFR, so we could have that 1,600 metres of visibility right up until we hit the boundary and we enter Class G. But we're not allowed to have that 1,600 metres of visibility in Class G. We have to have 5,000 metres of visibility. So you've got to ask yourself this question. I might be able to get airborne here. I might be able to get to the boundary, but what happens when I get to the other side of the boundary? Am I going to be meeting my VMC requirements? Remember, once you cross that boundary, you've lost the air traffic controller's assistance in providing separation from other aircraft, in providing traffic to you. So all of a sudden you're out there, and there could be other aircraft out there that you now are going to have difficulty seeing if the visibility is less than 5 Ks. When we're arriving into a Class D and we're coming in, we know that the visibility is low. We know that the cloud base is below that 2,000 feet above ground level for most of our Metro Ds. Then get in early. Make sure the air traffic controller is aware you're going to be requesting a Special VFR clearance. When you make your initial inbound call, say, look, the conditions look like they're going to need a Special VFR clearance. Request a Special VFR clearance. That allows the air traffic controller time to work a picture, and it allows you time to decelerate the aeroplane, get it configured, and be ready for what's coming next. Because as Craig said, you can expect delays with Special VFR. This is not a penalty. This is in fact allowing the controllers and yourself time to sort out the picture. If there is an IFR aircraft there, it does have priority, as Craig said, but I'm going to talk a bit more about that in just a few seconds. So always be expecting a delay and be prepared to hold somewhere. Now, the experience that I want to talk to you about is an example that I was involved with discussing with a young pilot up in the northwest of Western Australia. He was approaching a Class D control zone right at the very northwest. And as he was approaching, the weather was deteriorating. He was getting closer and closer to the ground. He was down to 500 or 600 feet. The visibility was deteriorating. He'd done the right thing and told the controller that the visibility and the weather was deteriorating, and they allowed him to keep coming in closer to the aerodrome. Now, there was an IFR aeroplane there. So the controller is required to give priority to the IFR aeroplane. And so he cleared the IFR aeroplane to commence an approach. He held the Special VFR aircraft about 7 miles from the aerodrome in a fairly nondescript area. In other words, it was hard to see a horizon. It was just all red dirt and low bush, so very difficult for the pilot to keep situational awareness. He was able to do that for a short period of time until the weather started to deteriorate more. And in this time, he found himself down much closer to the ground, below 500 feet, and with a visibility that was reducing. But what he didn't do here was he didn't speak up. If he had told air traffic control this, they would have cancelled the IFA clearance and given him priority because he had become an emergency. He was now in a very dangerous situation and he needed the priority. So always remember this, that while the IFR has the priority and you may be asked to hold, if you find yourself in a deteriorating situation, it's becoming less than your capability or greater than your capability, however you wish to take that. If it's outside your experience, outside your capability, tell the air traffic controller. Use that buddy, use that person that's there. They will assist you and they will then give you priority. And I've seen that work on a number of occasions where VFR aircraft, particularly students returning from training area solos, etc., have found themselves in reducing visibility. They've spoken up and the air traffic controllers have given them priority. So quick recap there from me. Remember what VFR is. Remember what triggers Special VFR. Use it because there's no stigma at all in using it. Slow your airplane down. Should I be there in the first place? Get in early with the air traffic controllers and make sure they're aware of what you need and get them working with you as a team. And if it starts deteriorating below your capabilities, speak up early. Thanks for your time. Enjoy your safe flying. Over to you, Craig.
Thanks, Richo. That was very informative. Thanks very much. From what Richo was saying there, from our case study, I think it's pretty evident that using Special VFR to depart a control zone versus using Special VFR to enter a control zone are actually two slightly different things when it comes to the risks we need to consider. And I think both the case study and the case study that Richo mentioned demonstrate that. So in conclusion from today, I hope you got a few points out of that and some things that you can consider and hopefully chat with other pilots about. First of all, know what Special VFR is and when you can use it. It's a tool to be used, but it has to be used properly like any other tool. If we use it incorrectly, it can lead us into a pretty hazardous situation. Think about the risks if you are going to use it. Richo touched on a couple. What's your recency like? How confident are you? Even though it might be legal to do it, it might not be advisable to do it depending on how recent you are, how confident you are in those sorts of conditions. And ask yourself what happens when you reach the CTR boundary. As Richo said, once you hit that Class G, your visibility requirements suddenly change. I think if we reflect back on the accident case study, I don't think that was where the pilot made good decisions. I don't think there was adequate consideration of what was going to happen once they left the Special VFR control zones. It should have been evident from the lead up to entering those zones that the weather wasn't really good enough for VFR, but in this case, for whatever reason, as we discussed, the pilot didn't make those decisions. So ask yourself, sure, I can legally get to the boundary, but what happens when I get there? Also, I guess the question is, if the weather's that bad that you need a Special VFR clearance within the zone, is the flight you're doing really worth the associated risks? We need to ensure that once we hit that zone on the way out, we are going to be in VMC. If there's any doubt about that, we certainly don't want to be getting airborne and putting ourselves in a bad situation that we may not be able to recover from. And always have a plan B. That's just not applicable for these types of incidents or using Special VFR clearance to get in and out of a zone. It's for any flight you do. Things can go wrong that we're not expecting. Always have a plan B. As Richo mentioned, plan on the fact you're probably going to have to hold at the boundary before they give you a clearance. If you've planned for it, you've got your minimum requirements that you're going to meet, then it's easy to do and you'll recognize when things are getting below your requirements so you can speak up to air traffic control. So incredibly important to always have that backup plan. Enact it before things get too bad. The pilot in our accident case study really didn't have a plan B, or if he did, he didn't enact it. Remember, at some point, if things get bad, you have to make that mental decision to switch to IFR technique. Get onto the attitude indicator, get the aircraft at a safe attitude, start your selective radial scan, and execute your IMC maneuver to get yourself safe to safety height. Hopefully that's something you practice regularly. I know we do it on our flight reviews, but in the ideal world, if you do have the resources to do it, I'd be engaging an instructor to take you up and practicing that sort of escape maneuver and IFR practice, just in case you get into that situation one day. So in review, we talked about what Special VFR is. We had a look at the regulations surrounding Special VFR. We looked at a case study that involves Special VFR and where things went wrong as a result of the weather that forced them into Special VFR. Richo brought up some really good points from his experience of using Special VFR and the rules surrounding them, and quick summary. So I've noticed there's a couple of comments in the chat there. James, you've brought up one about Bankstown and their clearance. Probably not one we can address specifically, but certainly happy to touch base with you and perhaps open some dialogue with Bankstown Tower and see what they were meaning on that particular day, why they didn't issue that clearance. That's quite an interesting one. And John, you've asked the correct phraseology when requesting Special VFR with ATC. Is that something you could help us with there, Richo?
Yeah, I'm actually just going to look it up from the AIP to get it absolutely correct. But the simple statement of inbound reporting point, etc., due to the weather, request Special VFR. Remembering that the word request Special VFR, it puts an implication to the air traffic controller that you're requesting something, that it's not necessarily an urgency, and you could word that up to require Special VFR, which now ups that ante to the air traffic controller. He understands there's a level of urgency towards it. So keep those things in mind. Once I find the exact terminology from the AIP, I'll put it in the chat for everybody, so it's there.
Thanks, Richo. There's an interesting question there from Anthony as well. Does ATC have to give a Special VFR approval? Whoops, it's just gone for a second there. Does ATC have to give a Special VFR approval after you request it, especially on return to the aerodrome? Your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, good question. The answer is it's a clearance. So the air traffic controller will only issue the clearance if it's within his ability to do so, be that a regulatory requirement or a traffic amount requirement, or the fact that he might already have too many aeroplanes, or the risk he sees it. So this is again where you up the ante with the terminology, but if you find yourself in that situation and it's becoming dangerous, you really need to make it clear you require assistance and you require a clearance to enter the zone. Use that, but they do not have to. It is not a requirement for them to do so, and they may have reasons why they cannot issue you a clearance.
Thanks, Richo. That's great. I'm just reading through one from Ben, and it's quite a long question, Ben. I know what you're talking about there. I'll follow that up for you. But basically, if you can't meet the legal requirements for the Special VFR, perhaps you've already got airborne or you're in the zone and the weather's unexpected, something's come up unexpectedly. I think that reflects back onto what Richo was saying before about update your call, communicate with air traffic control, and if you need to, declare an emergency. That will get you the priority if you can't maintain Special VFR because something untoward has happened. But I will follow that one up for you just to make sure that you don't need more detail there. No, that's fine. Awesome. That's it for the questions in the chat by the look of it. So we'll finish up there. This has been recorded, so if you do want to go back and have a look at it or recommend this particular presentation to anyone who you think it might be relevant to, please feel free to do so. If you do have any follow-up questions that you think of afterwards, give us an email, more than happy to chat. If we haven't properly addressed your questions today, same deal, just give us an email. And I would just want to finish by thanking you very much for joining us. We know your time is valuable. Really appreciate you giving up some of that time to come and listen to our presentations. Thanks very much to our guest speaker, Richo, and for his insight into this subject matter. And hopefully now you've got a few things to go away with and think about, and you can just chat with your other pilots. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again for joining us.
Goodbye all.